Hey everyone, tonight we're drifting back to the 4th century BCE, into a world of polished bronze, dusty roads, and a truly spectacular number of drinking parties with very poor outcomes. Slide under the blankets, dim the lights, and let your brain wander with me. We're going to float quietly through the close circle around Alexander the Great, his friends, his lovers, the people he called companions, and how he treated them, for better and very often for worse. It's a story with soft edges and rough corners. A story where loyalty was intimate, love was strategic, and affection, unfortunately, had to share the room with ambition. Let's begin with the atmosphere. Alexander's Macedon was a place where friendship wasn't a private luxury. It was the architecture of power. The companions, the heteroi, were not just his cavalry, they were his inner orbit. Childhood friends, palace pages, students raised together under tutors and drill instructors who taught them Homer and hammer fist tactics. To call someone friend in that world meant you ate together, fought together, and occasionally ruined each other at banquets. It also meant your fate was braided tightly to a young king who believed he was chosen by gods and had the temper to match. If there's one name everyone reaches for first, it's Hephaestion. The old sources describe him as Alexander's other self, which is not subtle. The two grew up together. Likely studied together, Aristotle's school leaves its fingerprints everywhere, and in Trojan piety mode. When Alexander visited the supposed tombs at Ilium, he crowned Achilles, while Hephaestion crowned Patroclus. The message was a gentle, theatrical whisper. We are those men, or at least we'd like to be. Whether their relationship was sexual is the kind of question ancient writers like to hint at, and modern readers like to argue about. The evidence sits in that familiar Greek gray zone of deep, demonstrative, probably physical companionship. What matters for our purposes is that Alexander treated Hephaestion not just as a best friend, but as an extension of himself and gave him the kind of authority that proves it. Hephaestion became Chiliarch, essentially the highest administrative lieutenant, think chief of staff with excellent hair. He handled logistics and communications, built bridges, commanded forces, and married into the Persian royal line at Susa to Drypetis, a daughter of Darius III. Alexander married Drypetis' sister at the same time, which was Alexander's favorite relationship trick, turning politics into family with a swift exchange of rings and a gentle smile that meant you're also a policy. Hephaestion didn't rival Alexander as a battlefield genius, but Alexander trusted him to glue the empire's moving pieces together. And often that's the more dangerous job. Of course, long intimacy meant long friction. Hephaestion famously clashed with Cleitus, another star in Alexander's tight constellation order, more traditionally Macedonian, less charmed by Alexander's Persian court experiments. The two nearly came to blows, and Alexander separated them like a tired parent sending bickering children to opposite corners. He's supposed to have said that Cleitus was a friend of the king, but Hephaestion was a friend of Alexander. The distinction was simple and gently brutal. Craterus loved the crown. Hephaestion loved me. Hephaestion's death in 324 BCE at Ecbatana lets us see exactly how Alexander treated someone when he loved them beyond reason. Hephaestion fell ill, recovered a little, then got worse after a careless meal and some wine, because of course it involved wine, and died. Alexander's grief cracked him open. He shaved, he wept, he ordered all the horses and mules' manes cut. Musicians were banned. The daily rhythm of the army was drowned under mourning. He had the physician responsible punished, some sources say, executed, which is a very Alexander way of saying, I cannot control grief, but I can control someone's career prospects. He planned a colossal funeral monument at Babylon, towering and intricate, all gilded symbolism and public ache. He asked for divine honors for Hephaestion, pushing a hero cult. The feeling here isn't subtle. Alexander treated Hephaestion as irreplaceable, and when he was gone, he tried to immortalize him, because memorials are what kings build when they can't build a life back. We might imagine this tender version of Alexander, all tears and wreaths, as the full story. But his treatment of friends comes with another recurring scene, a banquet, too much drink, a march of pride argument over Persian rituals and Macedonian freedoms, and a body on the floor. Enter Cleitus the Black. Cleitus was the officer who saved Alexander's life at the Granicus, cutting down a Persian noble who had Alexander's head half off his shoulders. He was older, blunt, a man who spoke to his king like a soldier speaks to a comrade. It was precisely the kind of friend a young conqueror needs, and the kind he often can't tolerate later. One night in 328 BCE, in Maracanda, modern Samarcanda, Alexander presided over a drinking party that turned sour. They argued about flattery. They argued about proskynesis, the Persian custom of prostration, which Alexander was experimenting with because subtle changes in court etiquette are always how great empires fall out with themselves. Cleitus praised Philip II, Alexander's father, in the kind of tone older men reserved for, back in my day, we won battles with fewer gold cups. He accused Alexander of forgetting Macedonian ways and giving too much to foreign dress and foreign kneeling. It escalated the kind of escalation that happens when a young autocrat with a temper meets a veteran with a voice. Alexander, drunk and furious, seized a spear and killed Cleitus, stabbing the man who had once saved him. He tried to kill himself in the aftermath. His companions stopped him. The next day looked like a remorse hangover from the gods. Alexander grieved, publicly and privately, because it's hard to mourn a person you killed, while also being the person who killed him. The moral, if we need one, is familiar. He gave his closest friends access to his soul, and then exposed them to his power. When both were inflamed with wine, with ideology, with pride, things broke. you'll notice something drifting through these scenes. Alexander blurred the lines between friend and servant, between lover and policy. The blurring wasn't accidental. He preferred to anchor loyalty with shared history on one side and shared self-interest on the other. When he forced mass marriages at Susa in 324 BC, he taking Statera, a daughter of Darius, for himself and pairing off dozens of companions with elite Persian women, he turned friendship into administration. Your household, your children, your inheritance would now be part Macedonian, part Persian. It was a political experiment, dressed up as a wedding feast. We will be one family because I say so, because I arranged the seating chart. It was also extremely unpopular once he died. Many of the Macedonian officers promptly divorced their Persian wives the moment the royal micromanaging disappeared, proving gently that coerced family is not a durable glue. Alexander's own marriages tell us a lot about his emotional economy. His first wife, Roxana, was the daughter of a Sogdian noble. The story says he fell in love at first sight, which sounds charming until you remember that love at first sight is often helpful when you're stabilizing a newly conquered region. Still, he seems to have genuinely cared for her, keeping her close even as he stacked additional alliances on top like a nervous architect. Roxana was with him on campaign. She was pregnant when he died. She bore Alexander IV, who would be one of the most unlucky infants ever born, the kind of baby who arrives with a kingdom and therefore a target. But while he lived, Alexander treated Roxana as his companion in a way few other kings did. He didn't shove her to the edge of the political stage. He gave her space in a world that wasn't generous to women. Then there were the Susa marriages. Beyond Statera, he also took Parysatis, daughter of Artaxerxes III. If you're counting, yes. That meant he married into both the primary and secondary branches of the defeated royal house. Because symmetry is soothing when you've dismantled an empire. Hephaestion's marriage to Dripetis kept the inner circle sealed. The two couples were now brothers-in-law. It's all very tidy and also very cold. He treated marriage as statecraft and people as state apparatus. When it comes to lovers, another name wanders into the room with perfumed hands, Bagoas. He was a Persian court eunuch, favored by Darius, and, according to several sources, quickly favored by Alexander. The relationship is depicted with classic Persian flavor silks, staged kisses at public festivals, and one famous scene has the troops clapping and calling for Alexander to kiss Bagoas after a victory, which he did, gently, because of course they made it theatrical. Alexander treated Bagoas kindly, indulgently, as a court favorite who gave him a bridge into Persian luxury and legitimacy. In a court where everyone was a tool or a risk, Bagoas was both. But the sources show affection here that isn't strategic. Eunuchs in that world were safe companions, easy to love without producing dynastic turbulence. And Alexander, who sometimes wielded people like chess pieces, let himself be teased and admired with Bagoas without immediately turning it into a policy document. We drift back to the other end of the spectrum, what he did to friends under suspicion. Philotas and Parmenion make the air feel colder. Parmenion was an older general, loyal first to Philip II, and then to Alexander. He had done the heavy lifting of early campaigns, the kind of man you trust with a wing of your army while you play at lightning. Philotas, his son, was a high-ranking officer close to Alexander. In 330 BCE, a conspiracy to assassinate the king was revealed crudely and late, as these things often are. Philotas was accused of knowing and not reporting promptly. Whether he was guilty remains one of those ancient questions where every source takes a deep breath and picks a side. Alexander had him tried and executed. Parmenion, stationed far away at Ecbatana, was then killed preemptively. No trial, no argument. The logic rattles softly. If a son is a traitor, a father can be a hazard. Or, if you prefer the cold version, if you want to sleep well, don't leave old lions roaming near your treasury. It's a clinical act, and it's how Alexander treated even long-serving friends when the scent of disloyalty drifted near. Kindness and gratitude were nice, but never threats to security. Another casualty of Alexander's rotational friendship policies was Callisthenes, Aristotle's nephew and the expedition's historian. At first, Alexander treated him like a cherished intellectual accessory, the man who would write the conquering poetry while the army did the conquering. Then came the debate over proskynesis. Callisthenes refused to perform it, standing with the unapologetic simplicity of a Greek who believed that kneeling belonged to the gods, not to men, even if those men wore extremely shiny clothes. Alexander took it badly. When a later conspiracy among the palace pages was uncovered, Callisthenes was caught in the net and died in custody, starvation, or execution, depending on which author's quill was sharper that day. If Hephaestion shows Alexander's capacity for intimate loyalty, Callisthenes shows his intolerance for dissent in his inner circle. He wanted friends, yes, but he wanted them to orbit him like planets, steady, deferential, beautiful when viewed from his vantage point. We might add a few quieter friends who fared better. Ptolemy, one of the bodyguards, lived to tell the tale, literally. He went on to rule Egypt after Alexander's death and wrote a history that cheerfully suggested his king was mostly sensible, which is exactly the kind of thing you write when you're polishing your own myth as well. Nearchus, the admiral, received trust and difficult assignments. He got the job of taking a fleet along the brutal coastline from India toward the Persian Gulf, exactly the kind of mission you give to a friend you respect. These are examples of how Alexander could nurture loyalty, share glory, and then leave people alive to spend it. It did happen. It just didn't always grab the headlines the way the banquets did. And then there are the gentle footnotes that tell you who he was in private moments. With his friends, he loved spectacle, but he also loved long talks about Homer about Achilles and the edges of the world. He slept with a dagger and a copy of the Iliad under his pillow. Probably not a recipe for quality REM cycles. He believed in destiny with the full, sometimes tedious, intensity of a gifted 20-something who has never been wrong long enough to learn humility. He wanted intimacy, and he wanted worship. That is a hard combination for friends to manage. They either loved him as a man and disappointed the king, or they loved the king and disappointed the man. The drinking, always the drinking. It wasn't just fun. It was a political activity, a court ritual. It was where truths were told that should not be told, where favors were asked that should never be asked, where one wrong song at the wrong time could cost you a career. Alexander used the symposium the way other men used the council chamber, and the risks for his friends were real. He organized a drinking competition at Susa that ended, according to one report, with dozens of deathsmen who thought loyalty meant keeping up with the king's cup. If you're wondering how he treated his friends in that setting, the answer is gently ruthless. He set the pace, and he never slowed down when other people slid off the chair. One more lover drifts in from the margins of the record. Barsine, the Greek-educated daughter of the Persian noble Artabazus. She had been married to a Rhodian mercenary commander. She was captured early in the conquest. She became Alexander's mistress. She's reported to have borne him a son, Heracles. Alexander did not elevate that boy while he lived, probably because elevating sons early tends to accelerate. The family drama. After his death, Heracles was briefly brought forward in the dynastic chaos and then removed from the board, because post-Alexander politics was a board game played with knives. As for Barsine, the tone of the sources suggests he treated her kindly while she mattered to his personal life and strategically when she mattered to policy. And then the currents of empire carried her away. You can feel the pattern by now. Alexander treated his closest friends and lovers with huge emotions, sometimes fiercely protective, sometimes theatrically affectionated, when they crossed certain invisible lines with terrifying ferocity. He could mourn you like a brother and promote you to the level of near-divine memory. He could kill you in a fit of temper and spend the next day trying to die beside you. He could arrange your marriage, find you a Persian bride, and hand you a province like a wedding favor. He could also sign the order that ended your life without ever leaving his tent. He was great, yes, but in the older sense, great in scale, great in appetite, great in the circumference of his consequences, and underneath the policy and grief, there's the ordinary human need that lingers. Alexander wanted to be understood. He borrowed Achilles and Patroclus because he wanted a language for closeness and fame. He stretched Persian ritual over Macedonian pride because he wanted someone in the room to acknowledge that he wasn't just a king from a little northern kingdom. He was a ruler of the world and deserved the bending knees. He collected lovers across cultures because he wanted to believe that empire could also be intimacy. And then, predictably, the reality of politics kept reminding him that feelings do not make good furniture for rooms full of swords. Let's drift over, quietly, to the way he handled refusal. When the army reached the Hephaestion and mutinied, exhausted and done with elephants and reins, Alexander sulked in his tent for days. He came out with a compromise and built altars. Like a man who understood that ritual could save his pride when people wouldn't, he treated his friends the same way when they resisted. If he couldn't have obedience, he'd have a performance. If he couldn't keep them, he'd immortalize them. If he couldn't forgive them, he'd remove them neatly and go back to reading Homer. What did it feel like to be Alexander's friend? It probably felt like walking next to a moving furnace. Warmth when you needed it. Power if you asked for it carefully. And the constant awareness that one gust could turn the warmth into flame. The old Macedonian friends who knew him as a boy could joke with him as equals. They were the most likely to die at banquets. The newer companions from Persia learned the choreography and prospered, as long as they never mistook choreography for love. Lovers were treasured, displayed, sometimes cherished, and occasionally used as bridges across cultures. None of them were safe, because nothing around Alexander was safe. Not even Alexander. He is the friend who makes you magnificent and then forgets to make you safe. He is the lover who lowers his voice and kisses you before the army and later asks you to pack for India. He is the king who tells you you're his other self, and then, when the fever takes you, commands empires to mourn, and disciplines the physician because a god must punish someone. It's not kind exactly. It's not cruel exactly. It's royal and royal in the old, unsoftened way. We'll leave him for now in that Babylonian haze, planning monuments and making toasts he should not make, surrounded by men who love him and fear him in almost equal measure, and by women who have been turned into diplomatic letters with jewelry. He would not live much longer. The friendships and loves he seeded would bloom into decades of wars after his death, which is exactly the kind of legacy you get when you treat your inner circle as both your family and your furniture. Let's float forward soon to the next royal fiasco. But for now, rest with the image. A young man, a friend beside him, 2 wreaths at a tomb, and a quiet, impossible promise they thought they could keep.